moving through this year. I did want to just, if anyone had been wondering, we are going to continue meeting virtually for the foreseeable future. I think it's easy and it certainly works for some of us, and especially Scott. I'm glad you're able to join here and there when you can. So moving forward, we had a really active discussion on our last meeting, a lot of different topics. I'll start with opening. Did everyone get a chance to review those minutes and or the video? Any questions or additions? A motion to approve.
Move to approve.
Okay, thanks, Carol.
I'll second that.
Thanks, Greg.
Okay, and I will go through the roster for votes. See, Greg voted yes. Carol voted yes. Donna, how do you vote?
The thing that I love the most, and hands down, is
Donna?
every single day. So you don't know.
Matthew, I'm not sure if it's just me, but your vocals are really, really soft.
Can you hear me now better?
A little bit.
Okay. I'll try to get the mic right in front of my face here.
Okay.
Donna, can you hear me? Okay. We'll move on. Scott, how do you vote?
Approve the minutes, please.
Okay. Sharon?
Approve.
And AJ?
Approved.
All right. And Michael, I see you joined us. How do you vote on the minutes?
Approved.
All right.
My apologies. Approved.
Okay. Thank you, Donna. Okay.
Okay, great. I actually went back and reviewed some of our video on the city YouTube site just to refresh my memory, because we had so much conversation around, we had moved into continued discussion of the master plan, but we really got into a discussion in July about our value metrics and what criteria we really wanted to use to evaluate things and any recommendations made from this group going forward. And where we left off, we were talking about social equity, which seemed to be one that we were all leaning towards, or at least a couple of us spoke out and said that was a high priority for us. And then the decision was made to start this meeting by diving into that further. Carol had taken some time to sort of pull together what was already in the master plan using the stated metrics there, social equity, stress level, and latent demand, and had sort of pulled that back together and then prioritized these segments based on that. And they didn't necessarily line up with the recommendations that had come from the group, just based on sheer votes and numbers, where I had aggregated our recommendations individually previously. So I'd love to open up that conversation again, and just to kind of get some thoughts around what are those value metrics that we would like to establish from this committee? What does that look like? And I think it would be good to set those up front, and then they exist and live going forward. No matter what it is that's brought to us, we know kind of what it is, how it is we're evaluating, and what it is we're judging from, before we make recommendations on anything going forward. Does that make sense? I feel like I just talked in a circle.
Sharon, could you give, I'm sorry, I'm probably a little unclear on it, and it's just more me. Could you give an example of sort of what you're thinking of with regard to the impact of equity as far as planning and things like that, just so for myself personally, so I kind of have a better understanding. And again, this is more just my neophyte experience with government, et cetera.
I think we're all in the same boat on that, and we're all trying to get a handle on exactly that question. if I'm correct, just to sort of list some examples of how that's been applied in the past and how it's utilized in the bike master plan, it's proximity to transit stops, low vehicle ownership, employment rates, income, and high concentration of minority populations. But I think I think we should ask that same question, you know, what does stress level look like, and what does latent demand look like? Because we should all have a clear understanding of what those metrics include, as we state which ones are our own personal priorities.
Right, because for my thinking, you know, as a cyclist and someone who spends a fair bit of time on the roads, I think it's important for me to understand and appreciate that for some folks, this biking or walking is a necessity, and especially as we move further east into East Winston-Salem, I think that certainly becomes more true. So I think for myself, I need to appreciate that and realize that, because yes, there are certain things I'd love to see when I'm riding. You know, I'd love to see the connectors going out of the city where, you know, we can ride 20, 30, 40 miles and enjoy that, and that would be fun. But I think enjoyment is important and recreation, but I do think for my own person and my own understanding, I think I need to remember some people have to do this to get to their job or get to childcare or do all these things. And so I think that for me to understand that is more important. And I think we need to balance, you know, as I think we have to some degree done that when we're looking at the master plan. So, I mean, I think that, you know, the East Winston-Salem area and some of those areas where there are, you know, like Northwest Boulevard and some of that is probably a place to spend some time with discussion and going forward.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Scott.
I also think that by focusing on social equity, we are also coordinating or aligning ourselves with some of the different organizations within Winston-Salem that are also focused in that area. A couple of years ago, the Winston-Salem Foundation came out and said, these are our 3 priority areas, and one of those is transportation. And getting transportation to the low income and minority areas. So I think if we begin to align ourselves with some of the other things that the city or organizations, foundations, nonprofits are focused on, I think that helps our efforts as well.
Yeah, agreed. And I'll just add, I know Sharon, you mentioned that Carol had kind of taken another look going through all these. So I don't know if we're going to look at that as a group, but I'll be interested to kind of discuss that. But I think from what I've looked at, you know, there are certainly parts where if social equity is prioritized, we're probably going to go in directions and prioritize things that aren't necessarily big wins for recreation. But I think there is a fair amount of overlap with some of the projects that, you know, are connectors that would be used by a lot of people more for recreation, but then also run by neighborhoods that right now are kind of on an island unless you have a car. So I think there are good opportunities for both of those things too. I don't think it's always either or. So just wanted to add that.
Sure. Any other thoughts or comments on that?
One other, I guess, Sharon, you mentioned the projects that we all kind of named previously, and I think it's been a couple months since we kind of talked about those and maybe had a top 5 or so. I found myself going back through monthly minutes, but maybe this is a question for you and Matthew. Is there a place where we can have that compiled just for us to look at. I know we talked last week about not working on stuff as a group month to month, but is there a central place we can just have a document that's easy to get to?
I would think so, certainly. Yeah, I mean, we could have, if you wanted to set up a Google Doc or whatever it is that could be easily shared between the group. I don't see any reason not, or just a spreadsheet that somebody maintains that is updated and is sent out to the group on a regular basis. I think either method would work. Really up to whatever your preference is.
That would certainly help me. I don't know if maybe everyone else is better at looking back through the minutes than I am.
No. I think that's just human life right there. And Matthew, can that live with one of us, or does it need to be on the link to the city site somehow?
I don't know. I can check on that, but I wouldn't get hung up on that. We can figure out those details. I think if you have a need for seeing the information all together and keeping that updated as you continue the discussion about the prioritization, we can figure out the details of how to post that.
Okay, great. Yeah. I think that would be a good thing. So I guess the question is, do we as a group want to set sort of a statement that we all agree on, or just a list of, we believe these are the criteria to be used? Do we want to be that formal about it and come to a consensus that we state and establish from our committee as far as value metrics? Or just to be cognizant of that going forward?
Does the city already have some of those metrics in adopted plans or I guess priorities that the city council has established? Are some of those already in existence that we could follow or tap into?
So yeah, a lot of that's the analysis that was done to identify the, what is it, 16 or so priority projects in the bike plan. So that kind of analysis went into it. I think what the group is working on now is just paring down that larger list of priorities into a couple subsets so that we can begin work on what you all consider to be the priorities from that plan of that group of 16 or so. So a lot of the data is already there, and I think that's, if I'm right on what the work that Carol had done, that was kind of refining using that data and then prioritizing even further the projects that were identified in the plan.
Sharon, does it need to be a separate statement, or when we present our tiering or ranking, is it part of that statement? Based on this criteria, this is how we rated, ranked the priority bike routes from the master plan.
Yeah, I think we could do it either way, and that might certainly simplify things, just to include it in our recommendation statement once we narrow these down. I think the goal was for us to take those 17 and come up with 3 to 5 that we would state as our current recommended priorities. So in order to come up with those 3 to 5, just as an example, based on the personal votes that we had submitted a couple of months ago, the top 3 were the Northwest Connector, Parkland South, and Reynolda Link. And those 3 were near unanimous from the group. But in taking the metrics used, that social equity, stress level, latent demand, the 3 that came up using that criteria were for Forsyth Tech, Wautown, and the Crosstown connector.
Mhm.
Northwest connector and the Louisville connector were sort of the secondary there. And sorry, I don't have a way to show you this side by side. So it's just, we need to figure out, you know, which, is it just votes that we all looked at these and said, we thought these were important, or do we want to layer in these metrics and come up with something a little more tangible that we can hand off to city council and say, we use these evaluation criteria and these were the ones that rose up, and some combination of both.
And a lot of people haven't seen the work that I did. And I also want to acknowledge that AJ built the original spreadsheet that I started with. But maybe we could go through that, and because I don't know that the rating criteria that I used is the end all be all, and it's not actually. So I would love for the committee to provide some feedback on that, and I can adjust some of that criteria and quickly get it updated and see what that does. If anyone disagrees with the ranking and rating, I should say the weighting that I used on the different ones. So I can try to get it pulled up. I've not used it on WebEx before, but if the committee is interested, I'm happy to share.
Yeah, I think that would be good to see.
Okay.
And I appreciate the use of the word weighting. That probably is a better
Yeah.
terminology.
Let me know when you can see it.
I can see it.
Okay, I have 2 pages here. This one that I have displayed right now is my notes section, and it might be best to go through the notes first. So you can see latent demand is up here. And what I did was in the bicycle master plan, the latent demand includes distance to schools, distances to colleges and universities, parks, greenway entrances, bus stops, population density, short distance for commuter density, zero car households, single car households, job density, and retail accommodation, food services. So that's everything that the latent demand already includes. And then there was a map, and I tried to take each one of these maps and overlay it on top of the priority routes, which was not easy, but I did the best that I can. And what I did was to say, all right, in weight order, let's just, and I just picked some numbers. So we can adjust any of these numbers that you think should be adjusted. But I went from kind of the highest latent demand of red all the way down to the lowest of blue, and I just gave a 2-point increment between each of those. So that's the weighting that I use for latent demand. The stress level, and AJ, I didn't have a chance to ask you, but within your spreadsheet, you had already listed like very high, moderate. And I didn't know if those were ones that you identified or if they were identified somewhere within each of those segments of each of those routes, or actually the routes, I think.
Yeah, that all came just straight from the master plan. Those text descriptions were in the plan, so I just pulled it from that.
Okay, because some of them didn't make sense to me, but anyway, we can come back to that in a few minutes. But what I did was to take each of those and also give them a score. So very high to low, 10 to 0. Then the social equity, and I was talking to Matthew about this before the meeting started, but social equity, there are 3 maps kind of underneath social equity. They're the low income, the minority, and the vehicleless. So I took those 3 maps and again overlaid those over the top of the priority routes, the 16 priority routes. And if a segment was in, it received 5 points. If none of the segment was in, it was 0 points. And this is a really heavy, this can be a really heavy score. So if you adjust this by 1 point, because most of those are in all three, you go from, I think I had 1 point each at the beginning and determined that 1 point was not enough. But when all three are in, that 1 point is 3 points for that segment of the route. If it's 5 points, then sometimes it ends up being 15 points for that segment of the route. So this score right here can really move the needle on a route. But if we decide that social equity is very important, then that score also is very important to try to determine or decide, should it be, 3, should it be 5, should it be 10? And you can see that a little bit when I move over to the scoring itself. So I've got some additional notes down here as how they were applied. So if any portion of a segment fell within any of those categories, then that particular segment was ranked in for the scoring. Trying to think if there's anything else I need to share. So any questions on how I applied the numbering system? Okay, moving over to the bike plan. I took a lot of the information out. This is really condensed down. But what I did was to score out each of those per route, not per segment. So segments are scored, but those segments then are added up to the route score. And let's see, yeah, so I'll stop there on that. So you can see the scores, and again, do we want to go just social equity? Do we want to go social equity and stress? Do we want to go social equity, stress, and latent demand? So here are the scores. I tried to throw ranks in some of these categories just so you could easily do it. But I think maybe the coloring kind of indicates quickly by the eye the scoring. So you can see that there are 3 different priority routes that were ranked high in 3 categories. So they were the Crosstown Connector, they were the Forsyth Tech Connector, and the Wautown route. So all 3 of those scored high in 3 different ranking scenarios or weighting scenarios. There were 2 that scored high in 2 categories, which was Northwest Connector and the Louisville Connector. And then there were a couple of them that scored high in 1 category. One was the Long Branch Trail and the other was the Walkertown Quarry. So that, using social equity, latent demand, and or stress, kind of shows you the top routes based on that criteria. And would welcome feedback on any of this or questions.
Thank you, Carol. I appreciate this.
Yep, nice job on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is really good. Looking at this, I think if we do want to, like you said, tweak what the actual scores are or how we're weighting these different components, I think that seems like it's really easy to do with what you've laid out here. I like having all 3 as components and not just paying attention to 1 or 2, because I think I guess that would be my unofficial vote, just because I think there are some places that a really high stress level, even if it's not serving as many people, would make a significant safety improvement or something. So I like the idea of all three somehow being in here and allowing one to come up, even if its social equity score isn't the highest.
Yeah, I agree with AJ and Carol. Thank you for doing this. This is amazing and really helps. It's actually kind of changed how I was looking at this and ranking, and given me something to think more about with regard to just considering all three scores. I think is a good idea, and also kind of changing my opinion more from a recreational focus to one of consideration of just some of the basics that people need and routes that need and things that need to happen to make these safe. So yeah, really good job. And but I agree with AJ as well. I'd like to have some way to consider all three in the final scoring.
Okay.
I have a quick question. So we're doing the criteria, and I'm wondering, we do this, what impact does this have on the work we do, Matthew? Tell me what when the committee, when this group does something like this, creates the criteria, what does good look like for this group in terms of the impact and influence it has on the overall master plan? What is it that would influence it? I think I just want a little clarity on, I know there's work that's already being done, projects are moving forward, they're being funded. What impact will having the criteria have on what's happening? And is there something city council is looking for from us to say, this is where we need to start focusing? Can you share with me a little bit about what the impact this group will have on having projects be prioritized?
Sure, yeah, so I can discuss that a little bit. So, the plan itself, so the plan used the social equity or the social equity stress analysis and latent demand score to come up with these 17 priority projects. What we're trying to do now is break that down. We can't pursue all of those projects at once. So the goal with the group is to help us identify which projects we should pursue right now, which of these are the priorities that we can put some resources into and begin studying to figure out, which of these is feasible. So that's really the goal for the group, I think, is help us figure out, and make it justify which of these 17 priorities we're actually going to pursue first. And I think, the methodology here, that's what we're looking for, is that justification. All right, so we are going to pursue these 3 projects, let's say, and here's the group's thinking and justification for why those 3 are important out of the 17. So I think if you can help us identify those top priorities, and then justify the reason for choosing those top priorities, we'd be in good shape.
Okay. Now, will there be a presentation to City Council at the end of this, or tell me kind of what would be next steps, and then we wait for an outcome, and then we help influence, I guess, the disseminators of information?
Right. So yeah, we would, if we want to apply money to any funding to these projects, we would need City Council approval to do that. And I think that's where, this discussion and the justification comes in. They'll want to know why this group, selected these projects. That whichever ones you're going to select, they'll want some justification for that. I think that's where this discussion comes into play, and I think you're on your way to doing that.
Got it. Thank you.
Hey, Matthew, since you mentioned funding, that was one thing that I looked at when we first went through and kind of all just picked our own things on our own criteria. I tried to assess what I thought the impact of these would be with these different scores, but I also was looking at the estimate to complete these projects, and it seemed like some were easier wins than others, and some would probably be really uphill battles to get funded. Is that something we should be considering at this point, to take a short list of 3 to 5 to the City Council, or do you think, no, we have our top 3 to 5, we put those in front of the city council, and then funding is kind of the next step in the discussion. I don't know, I'm not looking at the estimates for these, but like in case we end up recommending the 5 most expensive projects and, you know, perhaps don't make as much progress as if we could have actually completed, you know, a number of them that are slightly further down on our list.
Right, and that's where I think, you know, having a few different tiers of projects, say you have you know, 2 or 3 different tiers where you have a top tier and then you have a second tier and a third tier, that will help because, you know, once you identify your priorities, you know, there'll be work to do in terms of feasibility. You know, what are the what opportunities do we have to actually improve the infrastructure on some of these roads? You know, can we change based on what's there now, or do we have to wait for a larger roadway project to widen the road or to make radical changes? You know, and you're right. There are certain projects that, you know, the trails obviously are going to be much more expensive than maybe some bike lane striping. But you know, I wouldn't recommend digging too much into that because, for one, we can always break these corridors down, right? Each corridor has multiple segments within it. So just because, you know, it doesn't mean we have to pursue the entire corridor. You know, we can pursue a segment of the corridor, and I think that's, you know, if you look at the work that we're doing right now, that's exactly what we're doing. You know, in some cases we're pursuing a part of one of these larger corridors because there was an opportunity to put some bike lanes in or to make improvements in one of those segments. So I think what I would do, I would keep it a fairly high level and just identify your priority projects. And then the funding, we can figure that out later. I think I had mentioned last week, you know, the Long Branch Trail, that's a project that we just submitted a raise grant application for. So those opportunities for funding, you know, they come up, they change. So if you had say this group identified a project that was a fairly high cost, you know, we may have an opportunity to submit for a grant or for a larger funding source. So I wouldn't get hung up on that. I think those opportunities will come up and we'll just respond when they do.
Great, thanks. And yeah, that's a good point about the segments too. I think, Carol, I know you have the segment info in here too, but previously looking at some of these, the whole project would be great, but completing segments like 1 and 2 would provide access to a whole side of town. So
Right.
that makes sense as our first pass to come up with like a top list of these, and then we can dig into them.
Matthew, since you brought up the Long Branch Trail, this is where I'd like to have a little bit of discussion around the stress level. And AJ, I know you said that you found that in the report, but if you look at Long Branch Trail, you can see a 0 rating for stress levels. And then you can see that if you only incorporate the social equity and latent demand, that particular route would be ranked number 1. But because the stress level was 0, it dropped it to a 6 when you add all 3 scores together. And that's why I was a little uncertain about the stress level indicators, because if I think about people riding a route from Northwest Boulevard up to, or Martin Luther King up to the Coliseum, and they're on the street, I would think that that would carry a high stress level. But I know it's going to be a greenway, which would be a 0 stress level. So I was a little uncertain as to, you know, are these the proper scores that are here when it's a greenway?
Yeah, I think I would want to like note what we did, but I think that we have an opportunity where there are greenways involved to go in and adjust the stress level based on the route that you'd be likely to take if that didn't exist. That it's really apparent where it's 0. I forget which one of these would potentially connect the Salem Creek Greenway out to Hobby Park area, but because that would be off the road, that segment stress level was non-existent. But the road that you currently have to take is I think, off the charts in stress levels. So I think there's
Okay.
room for us to go in and adjust those.
All right, I may go back and look at those then.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, AJ, that's just the approach we use with the Long Branch Trail. So, you know, in our application, one of the things we noted was that the alternative routes for, you know, in the absence of the Long Branch Trail extension from Martin Luther King Jr. Drive to 25th Street, the alternatives are Liberty Street and Patterson Avenue, really. Those are the nearest corridors that parallel and get people to, you know, the same origin and destination. And we looked at the crashes on those corridors. So you're right. You look at the parallel corridors and do the best you can with, you know, with gauging the stress level on those corridors instead.
Okay. So maybe before we make a final decision on the scoring, we should update the stress level.
Right.
Yeah, so
Okay.
Matthew, you said that you did that for Long Branch Trail, looked at the adjacent corridor. Do you know, for what made it in this master plan, are the data accessible for like what the stress level was for the corridor that these are running next to? Because what actually made it in the plan seems to just grade what the final route would be. So if it's separated from a roadway, the stress level is 0.
Yeah, I mean, we have GIS data for all of the latent demand and the stress, and so that's all available. I think, you know, again, I think I would focus on, you know, coming up with some general priorities, you know, with maybe creating some tiers, and not necessarily getting bogged down in that much data analysis, but keeping it at a higher level, and you know, and selecting some projects. I think, you know, the work that Carol's done here is a good start with that, and I guess that would be, you know, the approach. But we certainly have that data, and it's something we can look at.
I can use the same application that I did for the social equity and latent demand by using the stress maps, the stress map that's in the bicycle plan. That way we're consistent with using the same year data for everything. So anyway, it shouldn't take that long because you can see the ones that I would quickly identify would be the 4 that have 0 in that ranking. And just take a look on the map to see how it's coded for those segments.
That'd be
Right.
great.
You know, if you look at, you know, the stress level map in the bicycle master plan, you know, Liberty Street and Patterson Avenue were the 2 that I mentioned as parallel corridors to the Long Branch Trail. You know, those are shown as, I think, what is it, a high stress level maybe. So, you know, that information is all there.
Yeah.
So would the group be okay with sort of handing this off to Carol, and then coming back together again? Our ultimate goal is to come up with our 3 to 5 priority recommendations, utilizing these 3 scoring measures. Have her take a stab at shifting those stress level numbers to reflect reality, and then comparing that to what we had done based on our votes, and maybe trying to finalize this next month.
I'm wondering if it's possible to get a copy, and this has probably been sent out, but I just can't seem to find it, of the maps with the different categories overlaid on them, so that you can see how that impacts the actual route. So if that would be possible, that would be great.
All the maps are in the bicycle master plan. And what I did was to take the priority map and then lay the other maps on top of them. to get the color coding, and then a lot of eye stress, but try to then discern which segment is flowing through these different areas. So it's very, as Matthew might say, high level, and not real precise, but I think it's close enough. But all of these maps are in the bicycle master plan.
I think it's section 3 that analyzes the needs, that has those.
So you have literally laid them on top of one another and then tried to marry them together. Okay,
Yep, that's how I did it.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, kind of like a Venn diagram. I just, it would be nice to see that visually, another way of presenting this data, just to look at and give me a better idea. I kind of tend to be a little more visual with numbers and things, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I relate. Matthew, I'm guessing you don't have an overlay map.
Probably not.
Well, yeah, I mean, what Carol is doing is basically, GIS
Same.
analysis
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
the hard copy. So, I mean, I can look back through the data and do some overlays of those different layers, the 3 that we talked about, and see if that's beneficial to being able to visualize this information a little bit easier.
So, might it be possible to have or to coordinate maybe a field trip? I know I've been trying to, when I drive around, try to see these locations. And I've gone to some of the parks where some of the work's done. I've been trying to really understand what it all looks like. And some of the areas, and I'm not as familiar with in Winston-Salem, so I just try to get out. But I don't know whether anyone would be interested in just maybe getting together and just going to the sites. Is there an interest in that? And if not, but I was just wondering.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea. I don't know about facilitating it or how big of a group we could get, but definitely be in favor of that.
If there are a particular group of people like that, I can definitely coordinate either meet up time, and then we just maybe even do one site a week, or a couple of sites I've been on, just to see where the projects are. Because when I ride around the city, there's so much going on. I'm wondering, okay, is this part of the master plan? I think this is the master plan. Just trying to, that's to Scott's point. I've been trying to visualize the work, and what the true impact will be throughout our city. But
I would probably make the recommendation that folks try to explore that on their own, just due to scheduling. It would be really hard, I think, to get the entire group in one place at one time,
okay.
apart from our meetings. But I encourage you to reach out to one another if there are others, if you think you could try to do that.
Yeah, and if there's someone that's like really, really familiar with Winston-Salem, if I can connect with you, because I have been here a while, but I'm not from Winston. So there's some of these places I'm not even familiar with.
Sure. It's probably true for all of us. Any other comments on this? Are we good to move forward with that as a recommendation to come back next month with some slightly adjusted numbers and compare and try to sign off on something?
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. Carol, you've done a lot of heavy lifting. If there's anything else we can contribute over the next few weeks, definitely, willing to help out with that to get it ready for next month's meeting.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. The other thing on that Matthew had shared his MPO project list, which does show some of the funding pipeline, and there's some activity around these segments right now. As an exaggerated example, if there's a sinkhole in the middle of one of these routes and the road has to be fixed, Matthew's able to sort of attach what he can to, a resurfacing or some kind of activity along those lines. But then there's also things like grant opportunities or funding requests or DOT pipelines or other ways that projects get funded. So Matthew, did you want to talk just a little bit about what that document covers and how this group can utilize it just in generating awareness?
Sure. So yeah, this document started as an MPO, so the Metropolitan Planning Organization, as a document to update members of the MPO. And a lot of the projects, at least the first page of the PDF I sent, and kind of the top of the primary, almost all of the document actually is our federal funding sources. So you'll see there's a heading there that says funding source, and there's a whole alphabet soup of different funding sources. So STBGDA, CMAQ, and those are different federal funding sources that are available for bike and pedestrian projects. And those are funded, those decisions are made at the MPO level. So that's why you'll see other communities in there, Bermuda Run, Clemens, Kernersville, Louisville, for example. Those communities are all part of the MPO, and they have the opportunity to submit projects for consideration for funding. And this is how we track all of those projects, all of the projects that have been funded. So you'll see Winston-Salem has a number of those projects as well, especially at the bottom of the first page. And you'll see there's a number, it's called a TIP number. That's the Transportation Improvement Program. The TIP number for each of those projects, and then the details for them. And as you get into the second page, you'll see more Winston-Salem projects, and then the peach color and the blue, those categories at the bottom of the page, those are I should say just the peach. Those are locally funded projects. So in Winston-Salem, through a bond referendum, some of those projects were funded as well. So that was the addition that I made, to the MPO project listing, were not only the federally funded projects that we're managing, but also the locally funded projects that we're managing. So this is really a listing of all of the bike and pedestrian projects that the city is managing in one way or another, regardless of the funding source. I don't know if there were any specific questions about the format or the different funding categories, but I'm happy to have that discussion.
What is MUP?
I'm sorry, I heard something.
What is MUP?
Oh,
I
that's
should
the path, the multi-use path along Salem Parkway. Is that the project you were referring to?
Yeah, I was just trying to discern that. Let's see. How do I quit sharing?
Right, I see him at the
Oh,
top of
I
page
see it.
2.
Yep, I see it.
And I can share.
Where does,
This document.
stop sharing. I see it. Okay. Thank you.
I will share. Can you see this
I
document now?
apologize. Yeah.
Okay. So those projects that Carol had mentioned, MEP Phase 2 and MEP Phase 1, those are the Salem Parkway path projects that the city is now managing.
Okay. Multi-use.
Matthew, I know these are like different funding sources. They're all in different states in their progress, but is there generally a way that we can find at least rough details of what exactly each of these entails? I don't want to like run through the list and ask you to tell us right now, but I know about the multi-use path, but some of these other things, I guess, particularly in the green and peach sections, curious like what the details of those are. But is that something that we're able to find easily?
Yeah, so a lot of the projects, especially in the peach, those are bond projects from 2018. So if you look at the city's bond project page, there should be details about what those projects entail.
Okay.
And I can send a link to that page.
Right.
I think this is really helpful, and in terms of looking at this, and there's a lot of overlaying, at least mentally, that has to happen, but seeing how these may overlap with some of the priority projects we discussed, I think is helpful.
Any other questions or comments around the bike plan discussions in this list? Okay, we have just a few minutes left. The other thing was that the pedestrian plan, I think, was presented at a meeting last night. Did anyone attend that, or are there any comments or updates from that?
From my perspective, it went well. So that was the Public Works Committee meeting last night. So yeah, they're well received, and we had Jason Reyes from Alta Planning present that item, and it went over very well. It was approved by the Public Works Committee, so it'll go to the full council on Monday for adoption.
Great, thank you. The only other update I have was the Cycling Advocacy Network sent out a newsletter yesterday and had asked for some updates and information from this group. I just saw it a few minutes before starting this meeting, that Amy Easter, who organizes that, did add in a note about this committee and some links to our minutes and membership and the city YouTube page. I had also sent to her several community rides that I was aware of, which she's now added. They have a calendar on the Winston-Salem Cycling Advocacy Network webpage of community rides that are free and open to the public. So those have been included. And just some other general information. If you're not a member or haven't signed up for that, it's a good local newsletter to get. Visit Winston-Salem has included information about the bike-friendly business and just generally community advocacy type notes in their past two newsletters, which has been nice. And Michael helped get some information to them as well. And then we have coming up in September a cycling event. Michael, do you want to share anything about that? Are they, for anyone who might not be aware?
Yeah, so it's the Winston-Salem Cycling Classic. Typically it takes place in Memorial Day weekend, just due to COVID and just some other things. It's September 24th, 25th, and 26th. It'll be 3 days of criterium racing at Bailey Park. No road race this year, but it should be really good. We'll have concerts as well, but the Legion team that they've been dominating the USA Crit Series this year, they're all coming to town. So some really big kind of present day, superstar athletes are going to be around. It's the season finale for the USA Crit Series, and I believe that's on Friday night, which we've never really had Friday night races. So that's something that should be really exciting. And then we've also invited the international field that typically comes for that weekend. So there'll be kind of a mixed bag of other amateur and professional races Saturday and Sunday. and a little bit different format. Some of these racers haven't raced against each other this year, so it's, the USA Crit Series, they've got the same kind of consistent participants throughout the whole series. But then this other feature with the International is going to kind of throw a little bit more dynamics into the racing. But we're also going to have a veterans ride on Sunday, which will be open to the public, and it'll just kind of be an out and back on Long Branch Greenway towards Salem Lake. Just kind of a continuation of our monthly event that we have at Salem Lake. We'll certainly be inviting all those same participants, and like I say, it's open to the public. But yeah, for us, it's a good way to introduce those folks that are used to riding at Salem Lake but might not know the connection to downtown. So this will get them on the trail and kind of allow them to see, oh, it is a pretty short little ride to town. And there'll just be a bunch of other just community-based activities going on, and plenty of opportunity if anybody wants to get involved. Volunteering for various activities. I'm certainly behind the 8 ball and getting that notification out to previous volunteers, but we'll be sending that out here very soon. But yeah, so if anybody wants to get plugged into that or more information, just reach out to me individually. I'll provide any and all information desired.
Awesome. Thank you. If you haven't been, it really is a lot of fun to watch, and just really cool to see some of those pro athletes up close and in person as opposed to on the television screen. Any other updates or comments? Anything else going on? I encourage you all to continue advocating. Donna and Michael both mentioned awareness of some of these segments. I've had 3 different instances this summer in which I've encountered people on Salem Greenway who were lost. 2 of those people had ridden Salem Lake from the Linville roadside, but had never been on the other side from Marketplace and weren't sure how to get all the way through or where they were once they got out. So it was really fun to be able to talk to them and encourage them, let them know that they were almost there. And then a person in my neighborhood who's sort of new to the downtown area and didn't know Long Branch connected to Salem or to Washington Park for the dog park or those kinds of things. So we tend to all get into our boxes and not know what others may not know. So I encourage you all to be that voice and encourage others and make the connection where you can. Okay, with that, we are at closing and our next meeting is on September 8th. Thanks for all you're doing. I know it feels tedious sometimes and perhaps slow, but we're learning together, and it's far from a simple process, but we've made a ton of progress. So I really appreciate all the time and energy you're all bringing to the table. Okay. Enjoy this next month. Stay safe.
Thanks, Sharon.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Matthew.
Bye.
Thank you.